Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is my fourth reading from my book, The Wanderer Scorned, and this is the third part of chapter 1. My father woke me as the sunlight was beginning to filter through the trees. He held a finger to his lips once more as he pointed towards the stream. This time, out of the thicket, the sheep were emerging. We counted them as they drew up to the water's edge for a drink. All of them were there, and they were unsuspecting of our presence. We watched the sheep for some time, taking in the way they interacted with each other, how they all followed the actions of one if startled. Abba cautiously picked up his water skin and stick and gestured for me to do the same. He walked around the back of the sipping sheep, his bare feet making no noise on the undergrowth. He raised his palm, motioning for me to stay where I was on the other side of the flock. The ram raised its head and spotted my father. He became uneasy, his legs jittering, as he considered whether to go forward through the stream or backward through his ewes. Then his brown face switched to wide-eyed panic as he turned and barged through the ewes. They began to scatter, but my presence on their flanks surprised them, and rather than dispersing to the sides, they rushed through the thicket, two at a time. My father jumped over an opening and got ahead of them. He stayed behind the ram, stopping the ewes from moving to the sides once they were through the thicket. Copying his movement on the outer flank, I held my stick horizontally, and we began to gain some control of the small flock. The sheep calmed as they spied their familiar patch of lush grass ahead. We drove them onto it, then relaxed, letting them graze as a sign we meant them no harm. We stood watch there well into the morning, keeping the flock within a small area. All that time I beamed at my father over the top of the creatures, and he grinned back. My legs were beginning to ache, but the excitement of what we might have achieved prevented me from weakening. We didn't talk to each other for the rest of that day, afraid of raising our voices or alarming the sheep. Instead, we moved along leisurely and silently, walking a little way at a time, then allowing the sheep to graze when we came upon good pasture. That afternoon we led them to a watering hole we'd spotted along the way, and they drank appreciatively as they stood in the hot sun. I studied them as they drank. They were brown-faced, with lighter coloured coats on their back, which were smooth around their faces and neck, but curled slightly across the rump. Some of them had tangles and mats underneath their bellies, which were thick with waste and dead plants. Their tiny hooves allowed them to balance on the rocky surface around the watering hole with ease. The ram's horns curved down around his long, flat ears and almost jutted under his chin. Now that he'd settled, his eyes looked kind and not unintelligent. It was late into the evening when we once again approached the fallen tree. It felt like a long time since we'd been there. A boy had scampered over that fallen trunk just 2 days ago, but now I quite suddenly felt like a man. It was a suitable place to make camp for the night, and there was some cover in the other trees around. "Do you think you could keep a watch during the night?" my father whispered as he neared me. "Yes, Abba," croaked my voice, the sound of it startling me as I heard it for the first time that day, although I wasn't sure what I should keep watch for. "Good. I'll take the first shift, then I'll wake you for the second," he replied with a smile, patting my shoulder as he walked back to the other side of the flock. It took me longer to get to sleep that night. Although just as exhausted, my head felt busy with thoughts of the days to come. I was so pleased that my Abba would trust me with these creatures during the night that I didn't want to close my eyes. I watched my father silently standing guard. He always remained conscious of the sheep, while scanning the surroundings for movement. The striking night light shone brightly on the landscape, highlighting the waterhole in the distance and the tops of the mountains far away. Billions of smaller lights also flooded the sky. It struck me in a new way what my mother, Emma, had told me about Elohim. He fashioned the skies with his words. He ordered everything into its place, that he might be shown glorious, and we might have life to the full. Emma had always looked sad when she had recounted this saying, recalling only the life that had been lost. But I felt hopeful in that moment, hopeful of something beyond the banishment that weighed so heavily over my parents.